Elegant sword duels, knights leaping gracefully while fighting, weapons clashing in perfectly choreographed exchanges. Hollywood has turned medieval combat into balletic fantasy that bears no resemblance to how armored men actually fought. Real knightly combat was brutal, exhausting, and decided more by stamina and leverage than by skill with a blade. The truth? Knights spent most battles using weapons you've never heard of, in ways that would get them killed in movie fight scenes. Once you understand how knights actually fought, every film battle becomes ridiculous fiction. Stand in a cavalry formation waiting to charge and you'd feel the lance's weight, 12 feet of solid wood tipped with steel, heavy enough that holding it horizontal made your arm burn within seconds. This wasn't a graceful weapon, it was a battering ram you aimed from horseback. The physics were devastating. A knight on a warhorse weighed perhaps 200 pounds. The horse weighed 1,200 to 1,500 pounds. Charging at 20 to 25 miles per hour, the combined kinetic energy was enormous. The lance focused all that force into a few square inches of sharpened steel. You'd see the charge coming, hear the thunder of hooves, watch dozens of lance tips lowering in unison. Then impact. Lances punching through shields, through mail, through bodies. Men lifted off their feet. Knights thrown from saddles as lances shattered or got stuck in targets. The skill wasn't in the strike, it was in staying mounted. You'd grip the lance loosely, letting impact energy travel through the weapon rather than into your arm. Grip too tightly and the force would dislocate your shoulder or unhorse you. But here's what Hollywood never shows. Lances broke. Almost always, one good hit and the shaft would splinter. Then you'd drop the pieces and pull your backup weapon for the real fighting. The lance charge was spectacular, but it was just the opening move. The lance was a one-shot terror weapon that won battles in the seconds before actual combat began. When knights fought dismounted, they reached for poleaxes, not swords, because the poleaxe solved every problem armored combat presented. Reach, leverage, versatility, and armor-defeating capability in one 5 to 6 foot package. Stand holding a poleaxe, and you'd understand its genius immediately. One end had an axe blade for chopping, the other had a hammer for crushing, the top had a spike for thrusting. The entire length served as a lever for hooking, tripping, and controlling opponents. 4 weapons in one, weighing 7 to 10 pounds, perfectly balanced. You'd watch experienced knights wielding poleaxes and realize how wrong movies got medieval combat. No wild swinging. Every movement was controlled, economical. They'd use the axe blade to hook an opponent's leg or weapon. Use the hammerhead to strike the helmet, not trying to penetrate, but to disorient and knock opponents down. Use the spike to thrust at gaps when opportunities appeared. The reach advantage was critical. Against a knight with a sword, you'd keep him at distance with thrusting attacks. He'd try to close, you'd use the hook to trip him or knock him back. If he got inside your range, you'd choke up on the shaft, sliding your hands up to fight at close quarters. The poleaxe remained effective at any distance. The versatility meant you never knew what attack was coming. That approaching strike, would it be a thrust you needed to parry, a hook to dodge, or a hammer blow to absorb? The decision time was fractions of a second, and choosing wrong meant going down. Tournament combat favored poleaxes overwhelmingly. Knights who trained with swords switched to poleaxes when facing other armored opponents because the poleaxe simply worked better. When knights chose their own weapons for serious fighting, they chose poleaxes. Swords were for when you didn't have better options. You'd see a knight approaching with a mace and know your armor wouldn't save you, because maces didn't need to penetrate. They crushed what was underneath. A military mace was simple, a metal shaft about 2 to 3 feet long with a flanged or spiked head weighing 2 to 3 pounds. The flanges concentrated force into small areas, denting armor inward. Hit someone's helmet hard enough and it didn't matter if the metal held. The brain inside would impact the skull, causing concussion or death. Stand on the receiving end and you'd feel the impact through your entire body. The blow would ring your helmet like a bell. Your vision would blur. Your balance would fail. Even if armor held perfectly, you'd be stunned, disoriented, vulnerable to follow-up strikes. Warhammers work the same principle with different mechanics. A hammerhead on one side, a spike on the other, mounted on a 2 to 3 foot shaft. The hammer crushed, the spike punched through. Against plate armor, you'd alternate. Use the hammer to dent the armor and stun the opponent, then flip the weapon and use the spike to exploit the deformed metal. The technique wasn't complicated, which was exactly why these weapons were effective. You didn't need years of training. You needed strength and timing. Swing hard at the head or limbs. When the opponent raised their guard, go for the body, keep them defensive, keep them reacting, keep them accumulating damage until they couldn't fight anymore. You'd hear mace combat before you saw it. The metallic clang of weapons on armor, the grunts of effort, the breathing getting heavier as fighters tired. The exhaustion came faster with maces than swords. Each swing required full body commitment. After a few minutes, your arms would burn with lactic acid. Maces turned armored combat into a test of endurance, and the last man standing was the one who could keep swinging when everyone else collapsed. You'd draw your sword only after everything else had failed. After your lance shattered, after you'd been unhorsed, when you needed something versatile enough to exploit gaps in armor. The arming sword, the most common knightly sword, weighed 2 to 4 pounds with a blade roughly 30 inches long. Not the thin rapier Hollywood loves. This was a broad, double-edged blade designed to cut and thrust against armored opponents. Stand in actual combat with a sword and you'd discover how quickly your arm tired. Each swing required effort. Each parry jarred your wrist. Within minutes, your sword arm would be screaming. Within 10 minutes, you'd be swinging half speed. That's why real medieval combat was short. Human endurance had limits. Hollywood ignores. The techniques were nothing like movies. You wouldn't fence gracefully. You'd use half swording, grip the blade with your offhand to control it like a short spear, thrusting at armor gaps. Or murder strokes, flip the sword to grip the blade and use the heavy pommel and crossguard as an improvised hammer to bash helmets and visors. Against armored opponents, you'd rarely swing at all. Cutting strokes bounced off quality plate armor. Instead, you'd probe for weaknesses. Armpits, elbow joints, visor slits, the gap where the helmet met the gorget. Every strike was targeted at specific vulnerability points that required precision, not force. The stamina management was critical. You'd see experienced knights fighting in bursts, aggressive exchanges lasting 10 to 15 seconds, then both combatants stepping back to breathe and reassess. Novices exhausted themselves in the first minute and got killed when they couldn't raise their guards anymore. Swords were tools of necessity, not choice, and using them meant the battle had already gone wrong. You'd pin an armored opponent to the ground, feel him struggling beneath you, and pull your dagger. This was the moment Hollywood never shows, the unglamorous reality of how armored knights actually died. The rondel dagger was specifically designed for this purpose. A 12 to 15-inch blade, narrow profile, stiff construction. The entire weapon existed to exploit one tactical reality. Armored men who fell in combat were extremely vulnerable. Stand over a downed knight and you'd go through a systematic process. First, control his arms. He'd be trying to draw his own dagger or push you off. Then find a gap, visor slit, armpit, groin, the joint where helmet met gorget. Press the dagger into the gap, apply your full body weight. Feel the blade grinding past metal, through mail if present, into flesh. The sound you'd hear was nothing like movies suggest. No dramatic music, no clean death. Just struggling, laboured breathing from inside helmets. The scrape of metal on metal as you probed for gaps, possibly screaming if your strike hit, but didn't kill immediately. This technique had a name, the Mercy. Not because it was merciful, but because dagger work ended fights that could otherwise last indefinitely between well-armoured opponents. Tournaments had rules against it. Real combat had no such restrictions. You'd watch battles and realise most knightly deaths happened this way. Not from dramatic sword strikes during the fighting, but from daggers after one combatant was down. The actual combat might last minutes. The dagger work afterward was what determined who survived. Daggers didn't win fights, they finished them in the most brutal and unglamorous way possible. Movie knights never wrestle. Real knights spent huge amounts of combat time grappling because when both fighters wore effective armor, wrestling was often the only way to create killing opportunities. You'd close with an opponent, weapon strikes proving ineffective against armor. One of you would grab the other, hand on arm, hand on weapon, hand on helmet. Then the real fight would begin, a contest of strength, leverage, and balance that looked nothing like elegant swordplay. Stand in armoured grappling and you'd feel the weight of both suits working against you. You'd try to throw your opponent. He'd brace against you. Both of you would be straining, breathing hard inside helmets, feet scraping for purchase. The armour would clank as you shifted position, metal grinding on metal. The techniques were systematic. Hook your opponent's leg with yours while pushing his upper body. Trip him backward. Grab his weapon arm and twist while striking with your other hand. Get behind him and pull backward at the gorget, choke him or expose his neck to your dagger. You'd hear the grunts of effort, feel your muscles burning as you try to out-leverage an opponent in 50 pounds of metal. Every position had a counter. Every throw had a defense. The combat would slow to a grinding test of strength that could last minutes. Both fighters too armored to hurt each other through strikes, too evenly matched to throw each other easily. When one fighter got dominant position, mounted on top of a downed opponent, that's when daggers came out. But getting to that position required wrestling skill that knights trained for years to develop. When armor made weapons ineffective, knights became wrestlers. And the fight went to whoever could throw the other man first. Movie knights fight for hours without tiring, fence elegantly with swords, and die from single dramatic strikes. Stand in real knightly combat and you'd discover none of that was true, and believing it was could get you killed. Hollywood shows swords as primary weapons. Real knights used lances for cavalry charges, poleaxes for dismounted combat, and swords only as backup options. The weapons that actually decided battles were the ones movies ignore. Movies show graceful fencing. Real combat was brutal, exhausting grappling and weapon strikes that aimed to break bones through armor or exploit the few vulnerable gaps. The techniques looked clumsy because they had to work within armor's mobility restrictions. Film heroes fight indefinitely. Real knights had maybe 15 to 20 minutes of effective combat before exhaustion became life-threatening. The weight of armor, the effort of every movement, the heat trapped inside metal all combined to make sustained combat impossible. Battles were won by whoever could maintain intensity longest. And the killing? Hollywood shows dramatic sword strikes. Reality was daggers pressed into gaps while one man held another down, both gasping for breath, both exhausted beyond measure. That's how armored knights actually died. Not in glorious combat, but in desperate grappling on the ground. Your modern psychology wouldn't prepare you for the reality. You think you understand violence from movies and games, but the first time you felt the crushing exhaustion of fighting in 50 pounds of metal, heard your own breathing echoing in your helmet, felt your arms turning to lead after 3 minutes of striking, your understanding would shatter. The truth about knightly combat is uncomfortable. It was decided by stamina, leverage, and the willingness to wrestle in the mud until you could stick a dagger in someone. The weapons weren't elegant. The techniques weren't graceful. The victories weren't glorious. Medieval combat was brutal, exhausting, and over quickly because human bodies had limits that Hollywood refuses to acknowledge. Knights didn't fight like movies show. They fought like exhausted men in metal suits trying not to die, using whatever weapon worked and whatever technique kept them breathing longest.